Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now, here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We're now in our third season, and we remain just as excited as ever to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we talk to some really interesting folks about the beginning of our April themes on Earth Day. And today we're going to talk about Earth Day 2022. The theme of which is invest in the planet. And then we want to look at what are the best ways to invest in our planet, how does this look, and what is a good investment. So April now has finally become, I feel like, synonymous with Earth Day. The whole entire month, not just the day of Earth Day, which is always April 22nd. It's this Earth Day, Earth Month, officially marks the anniversary of the birth of what we know today as our modern environmental movement, which started in 1970. And though it's not an official, federally recognized holiday, it is nonetheless federally, I guess I would say federally responsive. It's a federally responsive movement. But it was instigated by ordinary folks from the ground up. And as most environmental accomplishments today still are ultimately done so. That is, after a very long slog, they're still instigated by one citizen or more likely some groups of committed citizens. And I think we should thank all of them as a part of our Earth Day celebration and activities this year. Now, it may be hard to imagine that before 1970, a factory or any type of plant could be almost in the middle of your neighborhood or next to your house and spew forth black clouds of toxic smoke into the air or just dump waste or other cruddy stuff into nearby streams or at the corner. That was perfectly legal. They couldn't even be taken to court to stop it. And all of that back then was possible because there was no Environmental Protection Agency, there was no Clean Air Act, there was no Clean Water Act. There were no legal or regulatory mechanisms to protect us and protect our environment. Can you just imagine how many lives that must have cost in terms of illness and disease that we didn't know about, but nonetheless experienced? It's no wonder our average life expectancy is being extended longer and longer today as we are constantly seeing how the environment around us affects us and our health and our well-being, as well as how we actually go about our day-to-day lives. Now, in the spring of 1970, Senator Gaylord Nelson created Earth Day, and he did that as a way to force this issue upon the national stage or the national agenda. Some 20 million Americans demonstrated then in different U.S. cities, and then finally in December of 1970, Congress authorized the creation of a new federal agency designed to tackle environmental issues, and that was the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. And in fact, EPA was the great manifestation or the great accomplishment of that very first Earth Day, and that's why we celebrate it today. And it does indeed appear that year after year, many more people are learning about the care and feeding of our planet Earth. And many are joining the ranks of the committed as they begin to realize how we take our home for granted and how many things on it that it provides for our sustenance and comfort are being rapidly used up, some to never be seen, felt, or enjoyed again. So this Earth Day, we want to dig into its significance this year in 2022. The theme of Earth Day 2022 is Invest in Our Planet. And we have some folks here today from some very accomplished and impactful organizations in the country. as it relates to environmental protection advocacy. These are all nonprofit organizations that operate independently of any government, or they're called NGOs, and they care deeply and act intentionally on our behalf and on behalf of our planet Earth. So who better to hear from today to start our monthly series and digging into this very important area? Now, did I thank you all so much for being here? And I'm going to briefly introduce everybody and hope I get it right. We have with us Glenn Hurowitz. Glenn is founder and CEO of Mighty Earth, and he has led environmental campaigns around the world for many years, and he is a globally recognized leader on forests, agriculture, and climate change, and on running strategic campaigns. Glenn is an acclaimed author and former aide to Senator Waxman, and he has played a leading role in transforming several industries and driving billions of dollars in clean energy investment. Thank you again for being here, Glenn. Did I get that right?
Thank you so much, yes.
Thank you. Our other guest is Kathleen Rogers, and Kathleen is president of Earth Day Network, and she has worked for more than 20 years as an environmental attorney and advocate, focusing on international and domestic environmental public policy and law. And under her leadership, the Earth Day Network has developed a significant role in advancing the new green economy and has emerged as a year-round policy activist organization. Earth Day Network now reaches into 192 countries and embraces many new constituencies. Welcome, Kathleen, and did I get all of that right?
Sure you did. I think, Glenn, you and I know each other, don't we?
Yeah, good to talk to you again.
Yep, that happens a lot on our shows. And our other guest is Patrice. Patrice is with Earth Justice. He is an attorney and is the vice president for the Healthy Communities Division. Patrice began his career as an attorney at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency that we've been talking so much about, at their Office of General Counsel, and he was Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the U.S. Department of Justice's Environment and Natural Resources Division. And prior to joining Earth Justice, Patrice was a Howard University School of Law professor, teaching, writing, speaking on subjects that were related to environmental law and environmental justice. Welcome, Patrice. So glad you could join us. And did I get all of that right?
That all sounds great, Bernice. Really happy to be here.
Thank you. And so I want to start out with Kathleen. Kathleen, every year Earth Day has a theme. And as we mentioned earlier, this year's theme is Invest in Our Planet. Tell us about where does this theme come from? How is it arrived at? And why is Invest in Our Planet this year's theme? And then what are its goals?
Well, at the risk of horrifying our other guests on the show, we have long, as an environmental organization, and we're the organization that came out of the first Earth Day, and we're sort of governed by this principle, I guess, that Earth Day should try to rise above, some issues, particularly related to endorsing or supporting companies or other issues related to building a green economy. But over the last 10 years, we've become more certain. And again, we work globally, and we're very different than most organizations, that for a couple of reasons, we as an organization had to not just learn about, but embrace the green economy. As it turns out, I'm a huge student of the Industrial Revolution and some other tech revolutions, and I spend most of my time reading about it. And I am convinced, as many other people are, that the Green Revolution will dwarf anything that happened in the 1800s till the mid-century, the last century. And so we started developing conversations, not with companies, but with entrepreneurs, inventors, innovators, and again, some investors, about how my own community needed to be expanded and increase, the table size and welcome those types of individuals and or companies to the table if we really wanted to solve climate. And one last thing is that coming out of the COP, and we are generally a big presence there, again, because we're global, I think we were all in agreement that besides all, taking a giant step backwards, it was a pretty dismal affair, give or take a couple of things like methane. But the real action at the COP, they were all wearing suits. It was the business community. It was overrun with companies, individuals, and others who were making deals, plotting and then succeeding in carving up the green economy. And so we decided to create a theme that would reflect the need for all people, governments, individuals and companies to take their investment in how to build this green economy, not just to grow it for the global north, but with a real eye on how we can protect the interests or work with the interests in the global south to make sure that this revolution, unlike the rest of them, belongs to everybody.
Thank you for giving that expansive definition of how we got to this year's theme of Invest in Our Planet. And I'm so glad you did, because that's what we here at Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio are about, is helping people explore and understand why they should care about it and what it means to them. So I appreciate it. We're going to go to break now. And after the break, we will come back with these very helpful folks from these very impressive organizations who've come here to help us understand that today. We've been with Glenn Hurowitz, with Mighty Earth, with Kathleen Rogers, with the Earth Day Network, and with Patrice Sims from Earth Justice. Thank you all. We'll be right back. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Market, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening, plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, non-mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today as we talk about Earth Day 2022, the theme of which is investing in our planet. And we're talking with some expert guests from some very impactful environmental protection and advocacy organizations as they talk to us about what are the best ways to invest in our planet and how does this look and what is a good investment. And we were just talking with Kathleen Rogers from the Earth Day Network, and she was telling us about how we got to this year's theme of Invest in Our Planet. So one last thing on that, Kathleen, and that is, were there any goals or any other type of framework put forth with this title? And I'm assuming that the UN has a lot to do with these themes?
Well, not particularly the UN. I think, again, the environmental community as a whole has been, rightfully so, addressing and approaching climate change in the negative way that, of course, it presents to all of us from any angle that you sort of review. And we don't think it's working. And so, again, most of the concepts around Invest in Our Planet arise and are sort of integrated with this concept that if we want to build a bigger movement, and Earth Day's in the movement building business, unlike Earth Justice or other organizations that have, very focused goals and objectives, very concrete, whether it's litigation, whether it's regulation, whether it's writing laws, defending those laws, all of which I've done in the past. But Earth Day is unique in the sense that our entire MO and purpose is to move people down the pathway to environmentalism. And for us, it's all about climate. In that regard, whether it's the United States or other countries, despite some polling to the contrary, we deeply believe that the community as a whole needs to be expanded. It needs to be broader. It needs to be more integrated.
I agree with you, Kathleen.
And it's been none of those things.
I agree with you very much. I want to go out to the other guys here. In order for us to see the change that has to happen, everybody has to be a part of it. To the degree that people have not been involved, sectors have not been involved, that is what has part of a great deal of what has been holding us up. So I think it's really wonderful. There's so many people, so many organizations, so many types of entities needed under this tent to get the whole thing moving. And that's what we're excited about on this show as we kick off this month celebrating Earth Day. And so I want to jump now to our other two organizations who represent that big tent that is absolutely required for us to see the difference that must be. So I want to talk with you for a minute, Glenn. Now, Mighty Earth like many of our leading environmental organizations, does its work to protect a living earth via advocacy and environmental campaigns. So I want you to talk to us a little about that and tell me, how do you determine what campaigns that you're going to be involved with, and what are some of the ones that we all may know about or not?
Yeah, well, our goal is to protect half of Earth for nature and create a climate where all living creatures can thrive. And so we choose our campaigns from that perspective. We're trying to work on issues that are just not getting enough attention but have outsized import. And number one among those is protection of nature. Of course, all species depend on nature for life. And if anything, the biodiversity crisis, the extinction crisis, is even more severe than the climate crisis, which is pretty darn bad. So the other part of that is that even when it comes to climate change, protecting nature, protecting forests, restoring ecosystems can suck a huge amount of carbon out of the atmosphere. And so nature is actually 37% of the solution to climate change, but only gets 2% of the funding. And so we've tried to focus to a great extent on addressing this imbalance and acting on nature and giving it the role it deserves. The number one task within that for us is breaking the link between agricultural expansion and destruction of native ecosystems. What we've seen is, whether it's for meat, palm oil, which is an additive to cookies and soaps and other products, is that we're seeing the big ag companies bulldoze whole ecosystems. There's many parts of the world where you can fly over and see nothing but plantation, monoculture agriculture that they're spraying pesticides onto, that pollution is leaching into waterways and poisoning communities, as well as sending more pollution into the atmosphere than is caused by every car, truck, ship, and plane in the world combined. This is a huge problem. What we found is that actually when people get involved as customers of the products that are driving deforestation and agricultural pollution, they can create huge changes. So one example of that is in the palm oil industry, which is the largest driver of deforestation in Southeast Asia. You could fly from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia in a jet at 30,000 feet, look out your window and see nothing but palm oil monoculture. Really frightening. And that was on land that used to be rainforests teeming with orangutans and tree kangaroos and rhinoceroses, and just totally wiped out and gone. And what we found was that actually these companies didn't need to expand this way. There was lots of previously deforested land where they could expand. And so they needed a wake-up call. And we and our allies got lots of ordinary people who consumed these products to say to the companies, we want you to stop deforestation. And that consumer pressure worked. And today, palm oil deforestation is down 95% where it was just a few years ago.
Glenn, will you help our audience understand, though, why should they care about palm oil and how it affects their day-to-day being?
Well, I think my experience has been that people all around the world really care about their fellow living creatures. And, when they find out that tigers or elephants or orangutans are being endangered by these agricultural practices, that's very moving. The challenge is they don't know what to do about it. And so one of the things that when it comes to any of these agricultural goods, these are things that we consume every day, whether it's cookies or crackers or soap when it comes to palm oil. But the bigger picture one is actually meat. It causes more deforestation than all of the rest of agriculture combined, causes more climate pollution than the entire transportation sector. And so we've had success in these other areas, but we're trying to apply that now to the meat industry, which is a really resistant to change. And that's not only destroying tropical rainforests. Here in the United States, we see the meat industry set up these factory farms that throws lots of pollution into the water. It causes a New Jersey-sized dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's sending a lot of the climate pollution that ultimately is fueling the forest fires, the droughts that affect people every day.
And yet we love meat. In our show, Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, tries to deal with a focus on a major theme every month. And in July is when we typically look at ag. I hope that others are seeing too just how interrelated all these things are. Whether it be meat or whether it be our potatoes or our corn, agriculture is at the loggerheads with our environment. They can coexist peacefully and successfully and hopefully, I like to think, but things have to be done differently than they are now because, people say, but we have to eat. You can't do anything about it. But at the same time, when you look at all of the toxicity, the contaminations, the detriment it's doing to the environment, then you kind of realize, well, yeah, we just like we have to eat, we have to do something about how we're treating our environment in this respect. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, just quickly, I think there are solutions, and we're encouraging the big companies and government to act on them. Part of it is just, basic good practices like cover crops, stopping destruction of native ecosystems. But also, we'd like to expand plant-based protein, cultivated protein that have a fraction of the environmental impact, land use, pollution associated with beef or chicken. And so that's where we're trying to move. And we're excited about some of these companies starting to integrate it. But the reality is the factory farm meat currently represents the overwhelming majority, and that's what we have to change.
But there's an interesting thing that's going on about that, an attack from two arms. Looking at, from the environmental perspective, also looking at how we do that, how we farm, how we go about getting our meat, and also from the health standpoint. There's a big move and a push for plant-based eating because of its health and nutritional benefits. So, maybe those two will converge upon a perfect storm. So we appreciate it. We want to go down to Patrice for just like a minute, Patrice, before we have to go to break. Now, Earth Justice is our Earth's attorney, you all like to say. So will you tell us how you all carry out that mission, including how well the Earth sounded the last time she called you up and asked you for some legal advice?
Well, I want to start with a couple of things. I mean, thank you for recognizing the idea that Earth Justice is here because the Earth needs a good lawyer. And that's very much what we do and the role that we play. I think there's some of this has already come out, right? We're in the middle of a climate crisis that's going to require transformation in much of what we do, certainly transformation in our energy sector, transformation in our transportation sector, transformation in agriculture and other places. We're in the midst of a biodiversity crisis that's incredibly troubling for a whole host of reasons, including the threats to these ecosystems that we absolutely rely upon and for which there are tipping points that we don't fully understand, and we need to be, make sure that we're avoiding. We are incredibly intense producers of toxics that hurt people, toxics that hurt the environment, and there's this idea of toxics tipping points, right? Points at which we just, the carrying capacity of the planet and its systems, including its people, to absorb these toxic exposures just becomes overwhelming, and we need to really be paying attention to toxics. And all of these things are really interlinked in ways that are important.
And I'm going to need to stop you right there and go to break, but I want to come right back at toxics because there's also a whole health approach to that too in comparison, how they build up in the environment, how they build up in our bodies. So we'll be right back on the other side and continue speaking with Patrice Sims with Earth Justice as he continues to tell us how the Earth's attorney is representing it. And then we also have Kathleen Rogers from Earth Day Network and Glenn Hurowitz with Mighty Earth. We'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are back talking about Earth Day 2022, the theme of which is invest in our planet. And today we're trying to look at what are some of the best ways to invest in our planet, and how does that look, and what is a good investment? And we are back with some of the most impactful and accomplished organizations in our country who are advocates for environmental protection and our Earth. We are back with Glenn Hurowitz, founder and CEO of Mighty Earth, with Kathleen Rogers, president of Earth Day Network, and with Patrice Sims with Earth Justice. And we're going to start back with Patrice, where we had to kind of stop him to go to break. And he was telling us how planet Earth sounds when she called him up and asked for legal advice and what's going on with her. Go ahead, Patrice.
Well, I wanted to get to this issue of health, because when we think about the things that are contributing, for example, to the climate emergency, the life cycle of plastics, for example, our reliance on fossil fuels for energy production or for transportation. All of these things have obviously profound impacts on climate in ways that affect people around the world. But there are communities that are at the front lines of every one of these industries and absorbing the toxic footprint that is produced by these activities. and it's critically important. I mean, you talked a little bit earlier about the idea of expanding the table and making sure that the conversations that we're having about the importance of environmental issues and these environmental challenges that we're grappling with now include a broad diversity of people. This conversation absolutely has to include the people who are on the front lines of all of these industrial impacts. So these are the communities that live in Cancer Alley in Louisiana. These are the communities that live across the street from refineries across the country. These are the communities whose neighborhoods are cabined between highways and railway yards and bus depots. We're talking about all of these issues, which obviously have a climate component to them, also have a toxic component to them, right? Each of these industrial sectors are producing carcinogens, are producing persistent air pollutants like particulate matter, soot, and ozone, that sort of smog pollution that has a profound impact on people's health, kills tens of thousands of people just in the United States every year, and sends countless people to the hospital, missed work days, missed school days, cancers, and other kinds of really severe effects on people's lives that both affect people in their individual capacity, but also affect whole communities and whole communities' ability to really realize their potential. And one of the things that's incredibly troubling about this and consistent over time is that the communities that are feeling this most profoundly are predictably and reliably disproportionately communities of color, immigrant communities, and low-income communities across the country. And the voices, the understanding, the inherent wisdom and knowledge of those communities about both what the problems are and what the solutions are have to be a part of the conversation that we're having about what we do about these crises that we're in.
Indeed. And thank you for bringing that up. It's something that we talk about with every issue, no matter if we're talking about oceans and waters to e-waste. These communities, the vulnerable communities, are the same. There are some out there that are kind of hidden vulnerable communities, and one of the things we seek to do is to let people know about those, like children. In the first season, we kept finding out over and over again how children get a lot of the brunt of environmental issues too. And you got to think, what are children of color getting? Like double, triple, quadruple? But children in general get a lot of that. And so one of the things that we like to do too then is to help people understand that even though they may not be part of the vulnerable community, they still are affected and must care. And I think this kinds of thing begin to bubble up to the surface, or the idea of it begin to bubble up to the surface more and more during the COVID pandemic, when people saw just how, we like to say, unbreakably intertwined and how unbreakably connected we all are. The essential workers who we depend upon for our services, our goods, our services, our comfort and convenience. They were part of that vulnerable class when COVID hit. And so when they were hit because of their vulnerabilities, then the rest of us who never thought about this doesn't affect me because I'm not vulnerable, then we got hit too. And that same scenario indeed is applicable and can play out with all of these issues. So again, thank you for bringing that up. Now, let me ask you one other thing, and then we want to go back and talk to Kathleen for a minute. So you were an attorney with the government for a long while, with EPA and the EPA Appeals Board, and I think you were in the Obama administration Justice Department, as we mentioned. So how does work on that side compare with what you're doing and or are able to do at Earth Justice? Because then you were representing the people. Now you're representing Earth.
Well, I like to look at it just a little bit differently, right? I was representing the people in government. Government's a bit constrained, right? It's operating within the confines both of a defined legal structure, the statutory authorities under which it has to act, but it's also operating in what can be in the midst of a really difficult political dynamic, which influences how the agency, how the federal government approaches its work. One of the things that's liberating in some ways about being in the NGO world, working for a non-governmental organization, an advocacy organization, I like to think that I am working even more for the people in the role that I'm in now, because I'm really thinking directly, what is it that is not working? What is it where we have to be thinking about accountability? And what are the levers to make sure that all the right things are happening to ensure that we're addressing both the environmental crises that we're dealing and with the human health crises that we're dealing with.
I like that your particular area, too, at Earth Justice deals with health, because that's how we are. It's about showing the health impacts, because everybody cares about health and everybody's affected by it. So when they understand what it's doing in that regard, then that helps people move to caring. Just really one last thing, again, before I need to move on and talk to Kathleen about something in specific, and that is, what are perhaps a couple of the major campaigns that Earth Justice has been successful at that we, the rest of us, may be beneficiary of, or may know about, but may not know where it came from?
Well, I think it's worth giving a little bit of an explanation of what we do. I mean, Earth Justice uses the law. We are an organization largely of lawyers, also scientists and other advocates, but we are using the law, and the law is a really powerful tool, right? When the political machinery cannot move to agree on ways to move forward, often the law is the only resort to make sure that things happen that are supposed to happen. You mentioned at the beginning of this conversation the idea that our modern environmental protection sort of emerged around 1970, and they emerged then in part manifested by the passage of really important, groundbreaking environmental statutes like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the statutes that deal with how we manage hazardous wastes. Well, one of the things that I think people don't fully realize about those statutes, they are really powerful tools. They had incredibly high aspirations about what we could accomplish as a society when it comes to addressing what were at the time profound environmental impacts, right? I mean, the conversation that we often talk about around clean water is, the Cuyahoga River catching on fire. But we had profound environmental problems at the time, and these statutes were designed to address those. But the truth is that without people litigating in the courts for the appropriate and rigorous implementation, application, and enforcement of those statutes, they would be a mere shell of what they are today. Because at every single stage, polluting industries were ready to sue, ready to spend millions upon millions to ensure that the agencies implemented and enforced those statutory programs minimally. And the reason that didn't happen was that organizations, citizens, and communities stood up and said, no, we're not going to take this. And they took the agency to court, they took the polluters to court, and they said, this is how the statutes are supposed to work, and you have got to do it the right way, and you have got to do what the law is telling you have to do to clean up the air, to clean up the water, to deal appropriately with hazardous waste, to deal with toxic chemicals in our homes, in our products, and in our workplaces. And it's because of those lawsuits, it's because of the application of the law that those statutes have the power that they have today. But we're not done. We have to keep holding those statutes and keep holding those responsible for implementing those statutes to account. And that's the role that we as lawyers play.
For the earth, indeed. And I can appreciate that. And I think many of us can appreciate, especially in today's world and today's economy, that much of what is our right, our entitlement as citizens and as people, we are having to go to court for it. Because we've got that opposing force, some like to say the capitalistic forces, seeking their benefit. And so we have to equalize it with the law to seek our benefit. Thank you for going through that. You guys really do some important work. So we appreciate it. We're going to go to break now, and we'll be right back on the other side to talk with our experts today on how we invest in our earth, what has it looked like, and what does it look like. Thank you. We'll be right back on the other side. We want to give a shout-out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to today's episode of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. Today we're kicking off Earth Day 2022, the theme of which is Invest in the Planet. And we're focusing on what are some of the best ways to invest in our planet, what's been done, and how does a good investment look, and what is a good investment. And we are here today with Glenn Hurowitz, who is founder and CEO of Mighty Earth, and Patrice Sims with Earth Justice. And we were with Kathleen Rogers with us, who is president of Earth Day Network. So again, thank you all so very much for taking time out of what I have learned are very, very busy and challenging schedules to be with us. I appreciate it. So I want to go back now to Glenn with Mighty Earth. So Glenn, how are you all there at Mighty Earth leaning into this year's Earth Day theme, Invest in Our Earth? And then what, in your opinion, is the most pressing environmental issue right now and or in the very near future?
Well, for us at Mighty Earth, and I think for many environmental groups, every day truly is Earth Day. We're running these campaigns every day. So our big flagship effort, as I would say, is transforming the meat industry because it has such a big impact on climate, because it has such a big impact on wildlife, and ultimately on communities. And so one of the things that we're really pressing for is big supermarkets, big fast food chains to stop buying meat from the big ag companies like Cargill that are driving destruction of rainforests, polluting the waterways, and shift to the better suppliers. And finally, seeing companies like KFC and even Burger King that have pretty bad records when it comes to how they produce their meat with all of these problems associated with it, introducing some of these plant-based and cultivated protein products. That's good, but we need to scale it up. When we look at what we're doing, people can go and talk to the managers of those companies and say, why are you producing your meat in such an unsustainable way? I think in terms of, big issues, clearly that's one of them for us. There's a lot. We've got to shift more rapidly to clean energy like wind and solar, decarbonize some of these big industries. One of the things we found is that there are examples of success where we've shifted rapidly to clean energy, to more sustainable agricultural practices.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Sure. Well, like I was talking about, there's multiple examples of stopping deforestation. Another example is, in the United States, clean energy in most cases is now cheaper than fossil fuels like coal and gas. And so the problem is that we have a lot of infrastructure already existing for fossil fuels, and we have to move away from that quickly. But that, what we are seeing is dramatically increasing use of clean energy, and it hasn't crimped economic activity. If anything, this is the economic opportunity of the future. And so we're trying to accelerate that and bring it into new sectors. Like if you look at the automakers, they have made some good commitments to shift to electric vehicles. That's great. And then what we're trying to do is say, okay, the materials that you're making your cars from, like steel, the leather in your cars, the rubber in your tires, the aluminum, that all needs to be decarbonized also. And so it's time to get your suppliers to change. I think consumers who say we don't want dirty cars, dirty food, et cetera, have a huge voice in this.
Now, Glenn, I know that you all there at your organization, Mighty Earth, have a lot of smart people. And I know you must have given this some thought. But how are you all going to pry people away from their meat?
I think, look, it's a great thing on a personal level if you can reduce your meat consumption or eliminate it, because it typically is the number one biggest environmental impact that people have. So that's part of it. And what people can do on a personal level, that's great. It's important and it's big. But at the systematic level, meat it's a bigger deal even than electric vehicles, which is a pretty darn big deal. And I think what we want the companies to do that are selling the meat is start to invest and scale up the investments they already have in selling more plant-based meat, more cultivated proteins, and just basically shifting to better practices for what they do sell. Because if you look at any kind of, whether it's plant-based burger or chicken nuggets or even down the road fillets, it has an environmental impact that's between 10 and 20% of conventional meat. So it's a huge deal. I mean, you can produce the same amount of protein on a tiny fraction of the land. That means we can free the land from the burden of supporting this giant industry. One of the most shocking statistics I've seen is that all the biomass of mammals on Earth, only 4% are wild mammals. The rest is humans, their livestock, and their pets. So that's something seriously out of balance. And that's just one example of how we have to get things back in. And part of that is providing sustainable protein affordably, and that's what we're trying to do. And we need the big meat companies that are currently profiting off of polluting our waterways, destroying our forests and prairies, to actually take sustainability seriously. Part of that is shifting the practices they already have, and part of that is bringing these healthy, much more sustainable products online.
Indeed. And what I heard you say in one case, and in the other case, it certainly seems to me to be something that's needed, but that is teaming up with the health folks, the healthy eating folks, the well-being. That's the folks who are pushing eat plant-based for health. You team up with them, you make a bigger impact, because it's like you guys and your campaigns are primarily at this point focusing on the companies, but also jump down to lower on the food chain or higher, whatever level we humans are. If we stop demanding it and eating it, then by golly, I'll bet those companies will quit making so much of it, or will quit making it, or begin to do it more environmentally sustainably.
That's right. And I think it ultimately does come down to demand. I mean, there's a lot government could do. We are calling for a Manhattan Project scale investment in bringing these plant-based and cultivated proteins to a much greater level. But ultimately, that's driven, by individuals, by what they want to eat, by what they're telling people they want to eat. I think it's one thing to purchase things, and you can have a much louder voice and bigger impact if you're telling the store manager, if you're going online and tweeting at companies that you want to see certain changes. Surprisingly, very responsive to that. I think that's the fact that they prize their brand so much, prize their reputation so much, is what's fueled a lot of our success in transforming some really huge industries that we thought were stubborn and stuck in their ways, but proved flexible when faced with consumer demand.
Patrice, wanted to see what types of ailments or legal action are you seeing most of from where you sit, and how may that be changing over time and anticipated to change in the future from what's going on in our climate, our environment?
I want to sort of amplify something that Glenn said about the power of government to drive change. I think one of the moments that we're in right now is an opportunity for the U.S. government to take some dramatic steps to drive change in some of the most significant and important ways, both for people's health and for the health of the planet. We're at a moment when we have to invest deeply in progress. It means we have to transform our energy systems from a fossil fuel-based energy system to a renewable energy-based energy system. We have to transform our transportation to renewable energy-based transportation system. We have to deal with industries like refineries and petrochemical plants to make sure that they're not creating sacrifice zones where communities, people, and the environment are being given second shrift in lieu of profits. And one of the things I think is really important for people to understand around fossil fuels, which is at the center of so much of the challenge that we deal with, both around health and around climate, the fossil fuel industry, regardless of changes we make around energy, will continue to look for markets for those fossil fuels and continue to find ways to pull those fossil fuels out of the ground and put them ultimately into the environment and into the atmosphere. One thing I think it's really important for people to understand: plastic is fossil fuels, right? Plastic is fossil fuels. And the fossil fuel industry is in the middle right now of trying to create an enormous global marketplace for plastic to replace the fossil fuel marketplace that has been there in the energy context for the last 50 plus years.
And it's still just as bad, maybe worse.
It's still just as bad. It's just as bad for climate. It's just as bad for health. It creates sacrifice zones. It kills people. It's killing our planet. So we really have to understand we have to use all of the power that we have as a country and all the power we have as a government to drive this change. I think we're at a moment where we need to demand that.
Indeed, thank you. And we only have just 2 minutes to go before we have to close out. I told y'all there's never enough time. But I wanted to ask Glenn how you see, because you do a lot with companies, how can companies best invest in the planet right now? You know, if you had to advise companies, and you say, for the year 2022 to meet some type of Earth Day theme goals, if you will, here's what you need to do or to invest.
Yeah, I mean, number one thing is get real. And by that, I mean, implement. We see dozens of commitments from big companies all the time. And then without scrutiny from their customers, from environmental groups, and from government, they often fall short on that. And so we say, okay, great. You know, you're pledging to end deforestation. You're pledging to shift to clean energy. What are the dates? What are the timeline? And what is the credibility of the financing plan that you've got? And I think it's incumbent upon people who buy from goods from these companies or people who invest in them to be checking up on them and making sure that they meet those pledges. Because we've seen companies like McDonald's, Burger King, supermarkets like Costco and Stop and Shop make pledges to sell more responsibly sourced meat that's free of deforestation, free of outsized climate and water pollution, and then utterly failed to meet those targets. And why is that? It's because their suppliers, the big ag companies like Cargill and JBS, laugh at those commitments if they're not backed by commercial action. So
interesting you say that. It goes back to what Patrice was preaching, that legal action is what makes people accountable. Legal action is what holds their feet to the fire. And that's, what you're saying. They make the big rollouts and make the big announcements and commitments, but there's not that accountability. Guys, we are totally out of time. As always, there's never enough time. So I thank you. We have been today with Glenn Hurowitz, who is founder and CEO of Mighty Earth, Kathleen Rogers, president of Earth Day Network, and Patrice Sims with Earth Justice. And they indeed have made us smarter, and we hope more literate and just more sensitive to what's going on to our planet Earth. Thank you all for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Bernice.
Thank you, Bernice.
And thank you, audience, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is the result of a trillion taken by billions of people every day, like yourself. And each of those small, tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up to the change we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for joining us, and join us again next week as we continue our Earth Day 2022 theme. Thank you.